Hey there, I'm Jake with the Roaming Homesteaders, and today we're going to be starting a series of interviews with small-time producers and homesteaders across the Pacific Northwest. This project started with the desire to bring to attention all of the wonderful things being done by small business owners and homesteaders in our area, and to highlight some of the things that you can be doing. We hope that this series of interviews serves as an inspiration to help you get your projects off the ground, to show you that you don't need to have 50 acres and huge amounts of capital to get started in producing something great and to getting businesses started. And we just hope that seeing this and how others have done this before you will inspire you to go out and try this for yourselves. And we're just really excited to bring this to everyone's attention and to share it with our community. We're going to start today with an interview with Nikki Conley of Athol Orchards in Athol, Idaho. She has a small farm and orchard that was started several years ago, and she and her husband Erreck have been working very hard to bring this into full production and to expand their business. She took the time to sit down and talk with us when we went there recently to visit with our children on an orchard tour, and I hope you're really excited to see this and that you're really blessed by it. Otherwise, we encourage you to check them out for yourself. So without further ado, here's the interview with Nikki. Enjoy! Hey guys, it's Jake. I'm out here today at Athol Orchards in Athol, Idaho, and I'm here with the owner, Nikki Conley. She and her husband run an orchard out here, and they make all sorts of great stuff. We're going to do an interview here today, and she's going to tell you a little bit about all the great things that she's doing here to preserve heritage apples and just make a lot of great products here in North Idaho. So, hey Nikki.
Hello.
Thanks for agreeing for this. We stopped by sort of on I won't say a whim. We called her last week, but she was very gracious to squeeze us in on a tour. We were a little bit late getting out the door this morning, as you saw, but I really appreciate you.
It happens. You have a family.
Here. Yeah, we only got 5 kids along for the ride.
I only have 2.
Yeah, well,
that's my excuse.
You know how it is. Kids are kids.
Yes, they are.
So, well, I know we've been talking for a little bit out here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your farm, your orchard, and what you've been doing here?
So we purchased this property back 2016, moved to North Idaho in January of 2016. So there was not a lot of snow that year. And we thought, this is peculiar. Where's the weather? Where's the crazy weather? And we were looking for property for about 6 months. And at that time, there was really nothing on the market. And I think there was a lot of praying involved. And finally, my agent says, hey, there's this property up on Bunko, and it's kind of near Silverwood, but it's up in the woods and it's very quiet, and it's in an rural agricultural region. And I said, okay, right there, that's number one. And it would be a potential of 20 acres on a creek. So it's Llewellyn Creek, or Crick, as the North Idahoans say. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we were looking for, was land and water. And so the orchard and a barn would have been a plus. So I got my orchard and I got my creek, and we got some land. Mm-hmm. And so we purchased the property, discovered the creek was right there on the boundary. And then there was this really cool old homestead or era orchard that was here long before even the previous owners. So they've been here for 30 years.
Oh, right on the property here.
Yeah, this orchard predates even those owners. So you can actually see, if you walk around on the other side, that there's an old orchard pattern, and you can see the stumps in the ground. And I know that they're rotting and that they could potentially harbor pests and whatnot, but for me, that's just part of history. Mm-hmm. And it's a really rich piece of history for this local area. And then we also found out that there used to be a one-room schoolhouse here called Cedar Mountain School. Oh. It was actually right out here in our orchard, and it faced Cedar Mountain. So already the property had all this history. And being in public education for a while, and zeroing in on U.S. history, and with my apple background, with where I grew up, how I was talking about the small multi-generational orchards and the apple festivals, and all this just kind of made this perfect little world in my head that someday I wanted to have. And we really wanted to raise our girls in more of a rural, slower lifestyle than what they had where we came from, which is Northern California, state of Jefferson. And anyway, it just kind of spiraled from there. We had the land. We basically restored the orchard with what was already here. We have a couple of apple trees. The old variety Red Delicious, if you ever want to taste the Red Delicious the way it's supposed to be. We actually have the old variety out here.
Oh, wow.
Also an old tree that bears pears. We're not sure what variety is. and then an old apple tree that I think is a McCown variety. So we already kind of had the ball rolling. And because I loved the U.S. history so much and I loved apples, it just seemed so fitting. I'd met David Ben Scotter at one of his talks through the county extension about the Lost Apple Project. And that was right there, that was the hook. You know, I got to know Dave really well. He, in fact, taught me how to graft apples. And so it kind of started from there. He came out a few seasons and we started grafting Lost Apple varieties up into my trees, like top working. And once I had that skill for grafting, I became sort of a fiend, you know.
It's hard to stop.
Yes. And, you know, right now I think we're at about 90 varieties, unique varieties that are really historical, really rare. And you really can't find them growing in mostly anywhere, unless it's a preservation orchard that people are trying to save.
How would you say your interest in preserving old apples started?
Well, when I started to realize that what we have been taught since childhood, that, you know, the apples are at the grocery store. If you want apples, that's where you find them, you know, and they're mostly grown in Washington, and there's some places in Michigan and Wisconsin that grow apples. And so kind of feeling like we've been cheated, like, man, we've just not been lied to, but why don't we talk more about the past? Why don't we talk more about how important apples really were to the colonists? I mean, there's scores of books and accounts and diaries that talk about apples being one of the first foods that the colonists relied on when they first hit the New World. Was they had to get those apple trees in the ground because there were so many ways that they used these apples. So right there, just this concept of, oh, you know, apples were actually used for very specific things and not just for eating or, you know, for just maybe making a pie or whatever, that there's actually pie apples, and there's apples that you don't want to use for pie. It'll make a terrible pie. And once I met Dave Ben Scotter from the Lost Apple Project, I then learned about John Bunker, who is back east. He's the one that founded Fedco Trees. And he's the one that has spent his life really preserving and going out and finding those lost varieties that are, you know, at these old farmsteads, and they're a couple of 100 years old. And so when I went back to Maine Apple Camp in 2019, that was pretty much it. I knew that I was going to be preserving old varieties, rare varieties, but also seeking out feral wild apples to try and cultivate, to see if there's something to them, if there's something that's valuable that can be used, whether it's for, you know, really hardy rootstock, or if the apples are great for cider making, because a lot of cider makers, they swear on the feral varieties. And, you know, they might use some of the cultivated ones too, just for some extra acid or the tannins here and there. But really, I think Apple Camp back in Maine was where it really solidified what my mission was going to be.
Well, what sort of advice would you give to people who are interested in starting their own small orchards for their home use, or even as something like you're doing here?
I would say seek out the traditional apple growers. I call them the old timers. I'm really not interested, obviously, in commercial orcharding, because we're not in it for that. I'm not in it for mass production of apples. I'm just wanting to preserve these rare varieties so that they're here for the future. A lot like what John Bunker said in that video. He said the apples are, you know, gifts left to us by people that are long gone. And I know that a lot of these varieties will not be producing at their full potential, maybe until I'm 70 or 80. But I feel it's really important to reach out to people that are more into the traditional organic method of orcharding, and it's not hard. It's you know, it is very much a partnership where you are just listening to your trees and you're giving them what they need. You know, we fertilize with compost, and we, like I said, we have this forest edge. The forest edge method is kind of Michael Phillips, you know, one of his organic methods, and you know, he passed away. But so we just try to do everything very organically, and just talk to the people that are in the old apple realm. You know, you've got the Lost Apple Project, you've got back east, there's MOFGA, which is the Maine Organic Farm and Garden Association. And they're the ones that actually put on Maine Apple Camp. It's like every other year. But John Bunker, Daniel Bussey, these people that are in the apple, they're like at the top of the apple pyramid. Like, these are the guys you want to talk to. And they are busy, but there are a lot of people associated with them. So if you're wanting to get into growing more of these older varieties and seeking them out, really it's just a matter of starting talking to people, you know, and what are their methods, what works, what doesn't, and pay attention to your region. You know, a lot of people look at the zones, like the ag zones. You know, if you look at the map, it might tell you that North Idaho should be like in, you know, 5A or whatever. But in our little micro pocket here, there's a lot of microclimates in North Idaho. So we really have to pay attention to what is the temperature and the climate where we are, what is the soil like where we are, because all of that's dependent on elevation. So there's a lot more that goes into it besides just what does the ag map tell you what your zone should be. And really, look out for rootstock and for varieties that are good for cold climates. Cold hardiness is really important if you want to have a successful orchard with these older varieties.
Late bloomers and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Nikki gave a talk here as part of the tour before we got a little bit of time here to talk now, but she was talking about how they're doing mason bees and just the importance of local pollinators. And I'll tell you, you probably see us, brushing things away as we're talking here. I'm really fascinated. This is one of the orchards I've seen with the most pollinators just sort of buzzing around. There's some yellow jackets and things here and there, but I've seen honeybees and I think even leaf clipper bees. I've seen like 5 or 6 different types of bees buzzing around here. And I also took some photos and video footage of your little mason bee places. But it's really fascinating to see how you've tried to incorporate a lot of that into your production. This is something that I would have expected in one of these established orchards that you see even in England or something.
It's just natural. It's a more traditional orchard. I have it spaced at about 15 feet spacing in the grid for the semi-dwarf size apples. And we do have more land that we're going to develop. Pretty much where people park is going to be a whole hillside of apples, and it's going to go back behind our house. And that will be just more of the old varieties and some of the Lost Apple Project apples, and just keep adding to it.
It's
whenever
an addiction.
it is. And you're already talking about like, let's trade Scion. Okay, whatever. Let's compare lists and see what you have and what I don't.
We're geeking out a little bit.
Yeah, so. But it's fun, and it really is kind of an unknown world to most people. Most people just think, oh, I'm going to start an orchard and I'm going to go to a nursery and spend $90 or more per tree, and that's just...
I can't afford that.
And I would... how can you establish in this day and age, especially with the way costs and taxes and gas and food and everything is so out of control, learning how to graft is probably one of the most valuable skills that anybody could have, because you can graft different types of fruits. You can seek out those varieties that you want for your purposes. If you just want to be a baker, in my instance, I have a lot of baking apples out here because I know that they're going to be utilized in our kitchen for pies and for apple butter and all sorts of wonderful things. And sauce apples and the storing apples. So I think it's just really important for people to just learn more about, how were apples once treated? How were they valued, 200-300 years ago when they were actually important? And now they're just apples. And I hate buying apples from the grocery store, because to me, all of those apples taste like cold storage.
I just don't
They
like
taste
the
like
wax.
cardboard boxes and the wax, and it's just not genuine.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit before we go what you're doing here and what your plans are for the future, and what you would like people to know. And
it's funny, I still remember sitting around the table the night that we decided what the name of the place would be, and people, they snicker and laugh like, oh, Athol, that sounds like, it sounds like apple, right? But regionally is very important. One of John Bunker's things is he always says, look for what grows in your area. Look for the apple trees that grow there, even if they're wild, because they are still of that soil, of that region, and they do take on characteristics based on the soil and what kind of water they get access to. And so it's just like wine. It's like grapes.
Apple terroir.
Yes, exactly. And it's just like the honeybees too. The honey is different every year. Some years we might have really light, clear colored honey. Other years it's really, really dark and just this amber, almost a toffee flavor. And apples are the same way. So for me, establishing an orchard here in this soil, this is glacial soil. There used to be glaciers in this area. Lake Pend Oreille was established and created by a glacier. So to me, it's just really important to have that here in this area where there's not really a lot of these. I don't know of anywhere that grows these apples aside from maybe Washington, some of the specialty apples. I know there's a farm down in southern Idaho. But so for me, it's mainly about growing these varieties, sharing what they are and why they're important, preserving these varieties for the future, for well after we are long gone and even our kids grow up and they have children. It really is kind of a future mission. It's just to make sure they're here and that they don't stop growing, or that one last apple tree falls over and dies, and we don't have those genetic that genetic diversity anymore. It's gone forever.
Yeah. Preserving the past for the future.
And really celebrating the apple by doing, we have the bakery, we make our apple cider syrups. we're celebrating these old varieties by doing the things that our ancestors did with them and celebrating that history, and really just getting people to understand how important apples were in the founding days of America. I mean, it was one of their first apples, and they had them through the winter, and they relied on them for their cider and for all these other things. So it's really fun to see people light up when they don't know about these things, or about the apple seeds not always being true to the apple. People just don't know.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like it's my mission to make sure they know, because who's going to be growing the food when we're ancient and not able to do it?
Hopefully our children.
Hopefully our children.
All right, so one last question for you. What are your favorite apple varieties?
That's not fair.
All of them.
The problem is, as I've been collecting these varieties, you see that the orchard's only about 7 years old. So as a semi-dwarf, a lot of these trees won't produce for 5 to 7 years. Maybe in some instances, some crazy situation, we've gotten like a Cortland apple, or maybe this year, for instance, we have Cox's Orange Pippins being grown, and my Ben Davis tree produced for the first time this year.
Wonderful.
I've never tasted a Ben Davis apple before. I've never tasted the Cox's Pippin. I only know about the flavor profiles because of what history says that they taste like. So I don't have a favorite apple.
That's a good answer.
You can't, because there's an apple out there I haven't tasted yet that could be wild. It could be up on the mountain, and I'm going to discover it next year.
And we'll just keep looking for them in the meantime.
Yeah.
So.
Thanks for stopping by, ladies. Enjoy the rest of your little trip. And go.
I've said it many times, I know. I would change my ways, I know for sure. When all the crows decide to meet, they settle down beneath my feet.
Again, this is Jake. We're out here at Athol Orchards here in Athol, Idaho, and this has been Nikki Conley showing us the ropes and the beautiful work they're doing here. If you want to come up and visit, I think your website's atholorchards.com.
Atholorchards.com.
ATHOL orchards.com. And just check it out, and make sure you check it out and correspond and call ahead or message.
We have, our website. You can reach out through that. We do a lot of workshops. We have pollinator workshop. We have our grafting workshop in April. This workshop, the Autumn Orchard Tour, that's every October. People can reach out on social media. And we also do an orchard stay here, so people can actually stay and do some orchard glamping here at our fifth wheel. And they can come out and have a bonfire in the orchard, and we bake muffins for breakfast, or cider donuts if it's the fall.
Yeah, it looks really cool. Actually, my wife was excited to see all of that, so maybe you'll have us up here at some point.
And goats and ducks and all those things.
Well, thank you, Nikki.
You're welcome.
It was great to meet you guys, and we'll be sure to send you the link.
Yeah, that's awesome.